Well, hello, everyone, and thanks for still being here and for staying for what's going to be a very important topic, financial freedom. Got the honor of having Arsh here from Human Rights Foundation. And I guess if we want to get straight to it, Arsh, what do you see at the frontier of financial freedom, and how do you define financial freedom?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the the panel's named financial freedom. What does that really mean, right? So the way we define financial freedom is the ability to save, invest, and transact without the fear of censorship, confiscation, and debasement. So it's not quite the same example related to personal finance. So if you're here for financial advice, I'm sorry to disappoint. But it's not quite the same meaning. It quite literally means being able to transact and use your financial abilities. So basically, what we're seeing right now on the front lines of financial freedom is financial freedom globally is under attack. So as Zach mentioned earlier, there's about 70% of the world that lives under some sort of authoritarian regime. But another stat that kind of helps harness what that really means in the terms of finance is that there's about 12% of the world right now, 12 to 15% of the world, about 1 billion or so people that live under a good currency, right? A good currency in a democracy. So that's the dollar, the yen, the euro, the Swiss franc, etc. So those are all reserve currencies. They're desirable by other banks and other governments to hold. And those are also currencies issued by democracies. The other 7 billion people live under some sort of authoritarian government, or they just have a really shitty currency. So that's the landscape right now. And what we're seeing is under those regimes that have awful currency and a lack of freedom of speech and expression and the ability to actually transact freely without surveillance, there's obviously issues there, right? So I guess like some specific examples would be what we've been seeing recently with, from Hungary, to where the government is putting together task force to fine people for speaking out against the government. We're seeing in Iran, they're using AI to basically auto-fine women for not wearing their hijabs properly, which is insane. And there's many examples like this, and I think they're going to constantly be exacerbated by CBDCs, which make things a whole lot worse.
Do you have some stories, some case studies of people using Bitcoin in authoritarian settings like the ones you described?
Yeah, wherever there's an example of a misuse of power when it comes to finance, there's always a thriving Bitcoin community. And that's what I love so much about it, is because you hear these things happening from Russia to Nicaragua to China, as you very well know. But then behind that, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. Like there's a booming Bitcoin community behind that, right? But I guess some examples of people actually using this tool, because it's one thing to think about this in theory, and it's another to hear about it in practice, and that's very much what's happening right now. Bitcoin is truly saving lives on the ground. So some recent examples, right? Like the only way to funnel money into Gaza right now is with Bitcoin. So how do you get aid? And it's all peer-to-peer, because as I mentioned, in every corner of the world, there's going to be someone who wants to transact with you or wants to talk about Bitcoin, learn about Bitcoin. So even in places like Gaza, or we saw in Putin's invasion of Ukraine, they've raised millions of dollars in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So those are definitely the more prominent examples. But again, you have in Afghanistan. I think this weekend actually marked the 4 years of Taliban's takeover of Kabul, and girls have not been able to learn. They've been forbidden to go to school. So some of our friends and partners are actually using Bitcoin to funnel money into Afghanistan to basically power these underground schools. In Russia, you had about a year and a half ago the passing of Alexei Navalny, who leads like the opposition group in Russia, and the Anti-Corruption Foundation. And what we're seeing there is that organizations and individuals are turning to Bitcoin. I mean, like they pay over half of their expenses and payroll and rent, et cetera, in Bitcoin. So we're seeing so many more examples now compared to 5 years ago, maybe, like when this was more of a tool of speculation, and even beyond that, right? So the landscape is definitely changing.
Yeah, Navalny, of course, a very powerful story where his Anti-Corruption Foundation, raised funds in Bitcoin because they were not able to raise funds in fiat rubies. Actually, the Russian state, I believe, created negative balances for the organization as a result because they were doing stuff that obviously the Russian state didn't really like.
Yeah, so I mean that's just a tactic of financial repression, right? I mean, specifically what happened was they pretty much auto-debited all their financial assets and put it into negative billions of rubles, right? So at that point, it's like, what do? You need to keep operating, you need to keep organizing, you need to keep defending, and they sort of independently turn to Bitcoin. Not exactly because they liked it, right? Like they didn't really, not exactly because they didn't want to get behind like their perception of like what the community is like, right? It's not because they're dying for 21 million or like they're carnivores or like they don't care about the perceived community aspect or what it does, but like they're interested in what it does for them. So that's what we've been seeing increasingly, and even political movements who may not like Bitcoin because of political reasons, but at the end of the day it works.
So the Human Rights Foundation does a lot of trainings for non-for-profit specifically, right? And I'm wondering what you're seeing in these kinds of trainings. Like, what are the obstacles to adopting from organizations like non-for-profits, international organizations, and the like?
Yeah, I mean, I guess typically what we've found, we've been, our first interaction with Bitcoin was in 2013. A group of Ukrainians came to us and asked us. There's still this Reddit post out there, which some people may have seen. It's like only Bitcoin can save them. It's pretty powerful, and it still resonates to today. But they were raising money for what would later become Maidan Square. And we were able to do a Bitcoin fundraiser for them, and we kept on seeing these examples, and we started running programming at our events, and we started introducing this to people. And at first, even just the conversation around money, like forget Bitcoin, the conversation around money was not very prominent in the human rights community, because a lot of activists, they were like associating money with more admin things, not so much as like a means to an end, until we went, like how many of you can actually get a bank account in your home country? And oftentimes the answer was not really many of them. So then we started talking about Bitcoin, and they've really been able to learn from it. Of course, there's a lot of pushbacks when it comes to NGOs. Like it's like, what will the board think of it? What are the tax implications of this? What is the social perception? There's a lot of questions here, and they're really valid questions because we also had to navigate those. But what really makes it more welcoming is our education program, which my colleague Anna, the former director of Navalny's foundation, who is using the Bitcoin firsthand on the ground and has experience with this, and Ben, BTC Sessions, we've been working together on some quarterly webinars and in-person trainings as well to kind of address the needs and desires, right? Because everything is different, right? Like, what is a nonprofit at the end of the day is a tax code, but is it are you a humanitarian nonprofit? Are you an environmentalist group? There's definitely different needs for different people. But like I mentioned earlier, when you need it, right? So people are definitely starting to come around to this, and they've definitely been more welcoming, due to the price and its notoriety over the years.
Yeah, it's great to see some of that adoption. And that's, I suspect, due to a lot of hard work on a lot of different fronts. So I'm wondering, we talked a little bit about the repression. We talked a little bit about how organizations are overcoming that through Bitcoin. But now I'm kind of curious, you've gone to a lot of Bitcoin events. You've hosted, you've attended, you've moderated several panels. Like, you're kind of a little bit all over the place, right? I feel like I see you in like every different country. So what's that like? And what gives you hope through all that?
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is truly a global phenomenon. And our work is very global, and so is yours. We've crossed paths many different times. But yeah, I mean, Bitcoin has taken me to probably 40 different countries, right? And as a result of that, I've been able to firsthand see the needs of different communities. So it's definitely different everywhere, right? Like, we attend Bitcoin events in New York, but then we also attend Bitcoin events in Kenya, and we go to Brazil, for example. So like the needs of different regions are very different. And I'm sure you've seen this as well, but like the developer community in Africa versus the payments and the infrastructure community in Latin America, it's just so cool to see different communities working on different things. And I think how that came about was people just building what's needed. So a lot of the payment infrastructure you see and a lot of the peer-to-peer aspect of Bitcoin was actually just naturally engineered where it was needed the most. So it's not like like typically technology like builds its way in the West and finds its way to the global South or the global majority. But with Bitcoin, it's kind of the other way around. And education has been a huge factor here. And we're very passionate about it, and I know this audience particularly is incredibly passionate about it, and that's why seeing this event between yesterday and today has been so great, because what really matters is on-hand training. Like, it's one thing to just talk about Bitcoin and the community and all the different aspects around it, but it's another to really be willing to help and know what you're learning, basically.
Yeah, on the education front, maybe you want to talk a little bit about the Bitcoin Students Network and all the work that's being done there.
Yeah, so like when I originally got into Bitcoin when I was a student, right? So this was about 5-6 years ago, and when I started attending different events and even through Twitter or whatever, interacting with the Bitcoin community, I didn't quite see many like younger people. There's definitely like teenagers and like low 20s, etc. So we didn't quite see a lot of that, but we knew that like inherently like this is Gen Z's asset. Like we just knew that. So we kind of dug into the reasoning for that, and it turns out that a lot of universities have all sorts of Bitcoin and crypto clubs, which is fine. It's just that they don't talk about Bitcoin, right? Like, so because there's no incentive to do so, because so many universities have endowments from large crypto companies, and there's often just like a funding and an interest problem when it comes to talking about Bitcoin. And it's also like, how do I start a club, right? So my co-founder Ella Huff and I, we basically started this group, and now we've been able to reach people in about 50 different countries, different students starting their own clubs, and that's really just the way to do it, right? Like, if you can do, like, in the sense that we're doing grassroots work at HRF, going from NGO to NGO, you can just go from student to student and empower them to start their own movements, because ultimately that's how you get it to the next generation. So providing financial assistance and educational assistance is a huge part of what we're trying to do at the Bitcoin Students Network, because ultimately we want to see Bitcoin in every university.
Yeah, and I think a really inspirational, on-theme topic for learning Bitcoin, of course. I'm kind of curious a little bit. We're talking about the Human Rights Foundation, all the work that you all are doing, but maybe the easiest way to bring this to life is what are some of the projects, what are some of the things that HRF is supporting that you're most excited about, and how will that help with people's financial freedom, with their privacy and their autonomy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's on brand to talk about Me Premier Bitcoin. I mean, they've just been killing it over the past few years, and HRF is proud to support them because at the end of the day, it's you can have great Bitcoin content, and at this point, there's so much of it out there, more than there was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, especially. But if it's all in English or if it's all skewed to one or two different languages, how does that actually get out there? Like, how do you disperse that information, right? So I think what Me Premier Bitcoin is doing is amazing. But we've also been early supporters of different tech projects. LNP2P bot, Sparrow Wallet, like different things that we support through our Bitcoin Development Fund, which was started around 5 years ago now, and we've been able to support just around 300 projects with $10 million in funding, and it's really needed, right? Because like you have Bitcoin, this like 2.4 trillion dollar asset, and then you maybe have a maximum of $20 million of funding that goes into open source development and educational efforts, and there's just so much more needed there. So it's really about choosing the right projects, and also like where it matters regionally, right? Because like there might be some need for translations or some needs for community events, but then of course there's also like the development aspect of it all.
Yeah, shout out to MPB for releasing a translation in simplified Mandarin and also Spanish, covering much of the world in terms of just learning about Bitcoin. Huge work. So I'm a little curious. This is also something that HRF has been working on. AI in terms of its implications for financial freedom and other elements of our lives. So I'm just kind of a little curious, like what's been going on with that, and sort of how do you see the lens of how AI will impact this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, to my demise, I'm unfortunately not an AI expert. I'd like to give it some.
Not yet.
Not yet. But what we've been able to launch is I think pretty cool and empowering. So in a similar way with what we did with Bitcoin, by pretty much adopting this technology in like the humanitarian lens and in the space, we've now been able to do that with AI as well. So we started this AI for Individual Rights program this year. And what that really means is, as an organization, right? Like there must be some nonprofits in the crowd, right? So think about grant writing, donor research, think about different reports. It's like, how can we use AI to basically cut all that time? Because as an organization that's just starting out, you're typically lean. You don't have an entire development team, right? So a lot of hours are spent on just things that can be totally done and perfected, or at least started using AI. So that's one example, but also different development things, marketing, videos. So we're really excited to like introduce this concept to the human rights world and see how they could adopt it in a similar way to they're adopting Bitcoin, and just have it as a tool in their toolkit, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
Have you seen anything where it's like AI and Bitcoin are kind of combining together for some of these organizations?
I mean, we're doing it, but I mean, aside from us, I mean, it's really just been a ride getting them to look at Bitcoin so far, but I think AI generally is, from what we've seen, is more welcoming, because it may not have like those preconceived notions or like false tenses behind it in the way that Bitcoin does for a lot of different reasons. So they definitely, like, different organizations and individuals have definitely been like more open to learning about AI. So I'm excited to see where that'll go.
Yeah, no, awesome work, and awesome effort just pushing this initiative forward. I got one final question for you, Arsh, and then maybe give you some time for some parting thoughts before our mayor, or Vancouver's mayor, takes the stage. This one's a little bit of a doozy. You were supposed to be on our CBDC and stablecoins and Bitcoin panel, and I know, like, things worked out a certain way, but I'd love to hear your thoughts now. What do you think Bitcoin fits into the global monetary order? Like, how are you seeing it between your experience, seeing how HRF looks at it, between all the different interaction points, traveling to all these different places? How do you think Bitcoin fits into that discussion?
I mean, look, so right now, like I had mentioned earlier, Bitcoin, completely is dominating the conversation around global remittance and how to do, humanitarian type of work. Now, you mentioned, I'll come back to this point, but you mentioned CBDCs as well.
Which just for the audience, I know we clarified this before, but that's a central bank digital currency. That is virtual currency created by the central bank.
Yeah, well, which you're an expert in, at least for China. But so you have Bitcoin, and then you have CBDCs, and I think they both play a role in the world's monetary order, especially now, because for so many of the examples that I was laying out earlier, CBDCs really exacerbate those. And right now, like we put together like a CBDC tracker, because there was a lot of gray area and question marks around who is actually doing CBDCs. Like, it might be more prominent in China or Iran, but who's actually deploying it and who's using it and what's happening? So we made this actual map. You can go to cbdctracker.org, and it's this interactive map where you can find out a bunch of information. But to our account, about 2/3 of the world right now, about like 125 different governments are either piloting, deploying, or researching CBDCs, which is a huge issue. Like, it just it feels like almost like a race against how fast people can adopt Bitcoin, and how fast CBDCs will be shunned upon you. So again, there's a lot of work to be done in Bitcoin education, because these things typically start slow, right? Like the deploying CBDCs, it often starts as a convenience, but and then ends as privacy violation.
Yeah, of course, 98% of global GDP, these countries are considering piloting or launching CBDCs. We have the digital euro, the digital rupee, and the digital yuan, of course, prominent examples. I'm wondering a little bit, as we are getting into the parting thoughts there, how do you see your work at HRF in terms of what you're working on, carrying this part of Bitcoin? And if you have any parting thoughts that you want to leave the audience with.
Yeah, I think the work that we're doing is just to be, ultimately we just want it to be an example for others, right? So like in our conversations now, things have definitely changed. Like earlier on in 2017, 2018, when we were introducing this concept, we had a lot of pushback from our community and partners and stuff like that, because it was.
And when you're saying concept, you mean like Bitcoin, or?
Yeah, like this whole Bitcoin and financial freedom concept and what it could do for the world, and even especially back in 2013 when it was Bitcoin was used for drugs and used for different things, but now it's completely changed. Like we're talking to large organizations about Bitcoin now, like Amnesty International and the National Endowment for Democracy, and Human Rights Watch. So now people are interested, right? Because like they're realizing that for whatever reasons, when it comes to sanctions or when it comes to the lack of mobility, that they actually need another way. Because what's also happening is going back to funding, right, for humanitarian causes. Right now there's say for every $100 that's spent on global philanthropy, right? Like about $1 goes towards humanitarian and civil liberties causes, and of that dollar, about 5 cents goes towards causes working on authoritarianism and like global human rights causes. So there's a huge funding issue, and so what happens is if you're an organization and you want to get aid into difficult environments or conflict zones or sanction zones, then what do? Like that money then ends up just going back and being spent towards the budget in a democratic country. So like that's why that gap is so staggering between the funding in democratic areas versus authoritarian areas. And it makes sense because a lot of the donors are from democratic areas, because even if you're say an individual with philanthropic abilities and you want to support humanitarian cases, but you live in an authoritarian regime, what's going to happen is if you support an organization, you put yourself at personal risk of jail time or fines, and we're seeing this all over the world. So like those would be my parting thoughts, and it's definitely worth giving Bitcoin what it deserves, and that is there's so many people here putting their energy into it, and I definitely think that's something to worth continue.
Arsh, thank you for your insights. Thank you all for spending time with us here. Hopefully some very important topics were covered, even though we talked about a lot of different elements and different lenses. Just remember, you can start small, get your first Lightning transaction in, you can be part of this global discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.